Hey everyone, I'm Joseph. I go by Snapper on the forums. This video is going to be part one of several videos that I do. This particular video is going to be about the tubes and rods that I use for the chassis of the truck. I'm going to show you guys how I prep them, cut them, and get them ready for brazing. If you haven't seen my previous video already, take a look over here somewhere. I gotta make sure I don't hit this thing behind me. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you can get notifications when I do upload that next video. So without further delay, let's jump right in, and I'll show you guys what I've got going on here.
Funny how the story goes, little hope but bigger dreams. They try to bring a sucker down, singing louder than the crowd. Listen the rhythm, I'm feeling brand new. Keep pushing forward, it's gonna save you. Never look down, love, not when we shine so bright.
Alright, so for this particular video, we are going to be talking about the tubes and the rods that I used for the chassis of my custom trophy truck. They're both 3/16 inch diameter. They're both steel. I think one of the unique features of this truck was that I used both tube and rod for the chassis since I was brazing it together. What I've got for you guys today is I've got an overhead camera, which you can see up here. I've got a detail camera, which you guys can see over here. And then I've got the overall, so you guys can see my pretty face. I'm not going to go through the entire build process. What I'm going to show you today is kind of the overall design that I'm going for, just with a few scrap pieces. And then I'm going to show you how I create the fish mouth and the overall form of the shapes that I'm creating. I'm working on creating a new bumper, as well as adding, I don't know if you guys can see this, there's supposed to be pieces from here to here, as well as these guys over here. So I want to create these two pieces here, and I want to create the new bumper pieces. Let's jump right into creating the pieces that we need for the bottom. And again, the bumper is more or less the same, but we won't go through that whole process. So for this particular situation, I use the tubes for anything that's more of a compression type scenario, which means basically that I'm trying to prevent this getting pushed back into this. So for the most part, any of the diagonal pieces were tubes, just to help save weight. If I had done rods everywhere, this cage would have been, I don't know, maybe 15-20% heavier than it is now. And although we're not really too concerned with weight on these things, I'm sure that a little bit helps. Especially when for those of you who have built these trucks. We all struggle to find the right springs for, the spring rates for the shocks that we're running. Since it's kind of a custom situation, they're not easy to come by. So saving a little bit of weight here and there probably doesn't hurt. Again, this is 3/16 inch. I think you guys can see this. Oops. 3/16 inch tube. It's a steel tube. And let's find a marker here. Hopefully this marker works. There we go. So I think you guys can see this up above. So my plan is to create something like that, and then create another piece that goes like that. So I'm going to cut out two pieces. What I tend to do is I overcut quite a bit by about maybe a quarter of an inch on both sides. So you guys can see that. It's a little bit, quarter of an inch on both sides, maybe a little bit less than that. For me, I use an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. There are other ways, a hacksaw, there are probably other ways to do it. I tend to use like a block of wood or something to just sort of elevate it, and then I just kind of go to town. So let's we'll stick this right here. Pull out the angle grinder. For those of you that don't know what an angle grinder is, typically you have like a grinding wheel on here that you can smooth out welds or other just imperfections in metal. I've got a cutoff wheel in here which is looking pretty sad at this point. Hopefully it doesn't blow up on me. You can see this edge here. Goes pretty quick through the tube, since the tube is obviously not solid. So let's see, we'll just kind of double check, make sure that's the right size. I think the saying goes, measure twice, cut once. So we'll do another one. I'm guessing they're probably exactly the same, but you know what? For shits and giggles, we'll go ahead and just mark another one out just to make sure. Put that aside. So let's see if you guys can see this. The rough cut is not great, but it's really not a problem. Most of this is going to get sanded away anyways. So one of the things that I created to build this cage was a way to create the fish mouth so that when you join the two rods, they come together much better than having two ends that are flat. I created my own little setup here, and I'll show you guys how that works. Using a power drill and an old on-road tire with a 4-inch, I think, or not a 4-inch belt, it's probably like a 10-inch belt. So what went into making this particular setup was this. Basically behind here, this little rod that's in here is a drill bit that I drilled into the tabletop. I happen to have this little collar that I was able to put on top of the drill bit so that the sanding belt doesn't slide off. Take this apart for you guys. So this actually is just one of the 1/16 rods that I've been using, for building the cage. And in the table, I drilled a hole that I slid in a bunch of bearings. So there's some bearings in there to help this thing kind of spin nicely and stay stable. And obviously, like I mentioned, this is just a rubber on-road RC tire and wheel. The gear situation just is something that I use to kind of clamp the tire to the rod. I've got a little pin in there. Everything that we typically deal with the RC cars. You can see the drill bit that's in here with the little collar on top. And just like anything else, you just kind of spin it, get it on there, and away you go. So not much to it more than that. It wasn't something that I figured out right away. It took me some time, but once I got it, it seemed to work out really well. I've gone through probably 5 or 6 of these belts over time. Every once in a while, the sharp edge of one of the rods will catch on the belt and tear it. It happens. I think I bought probably 6 or 7 of them, so I've only got a couple left, and hopefully that'll get me through these little repairs. So the goal is to get this in that corner. Let's see if you guys can see that, and that over there. Makes sense. So I can draw kind of where the line is. So the line that I'm trying to draw right now is the line that's parallel to this bar that's in the background. So if I kind of just go over the top of it, I can kind of see what I'm trying to get. Same goes over here. If I want to get that line and then this line, that gives me a kind of an idea of what I'm trying to get. It's not a perfect science. Basically what I'm trying to do is just get something close so that it fits in there nicely. So you can see that as I push it down against the sanding belt, I'm putting at the angle that I drew on the rod earlier. And in a second you'll see why. It's always a good idea to have a container of water nearby, because sanding and the friction creates a lot of heat, so a lot of times it'll get too hot to hold, but in this case we're not doing very much. So what I did right there is I just used the sanding belt to kind of clean off the burrs from the rod. I don't know if you guys can see that. Not sure how well this one focuses. Probably not too well. Let's try this other one. You guys can see this, hopefully. Let's see. Boom. Focus. So that's what I call a fish mouth. And I'm not sure where that term comes from, but probably has something to do with it. It looks like a fish mouth. Alright, so I'm getting a little bit closer. I did a little bit of work in the background here. I don't want to bore you guys too much, but I've got the it's kind of a double fish mouth. It's got a cut on both sides, and the reason for that is we've got an angle where the three rods meet, which is this rod here, and then ultimately the rod that I'm going to be adding. So I created a fish mouth so that it fits in there really well, but I don't know if you guys can see that it's a little bit long. It should be lining up with the center, or even just a hair to the top of that center point. So I need to shorten that fish mouth a little bit more. See if you guys can see this from above. It's a little bit on the long side, so we'll shorten that up. So I went ahead and took the liberty of finishing up the second piece. I don't want to bore you guys with the sanding and the fitting and the sanding and the fitting. They didn't come out perfect. They never do. Well, I guess sometimes they do. But for the most part, they fit in there pretty snugly. They stay really well in place, which is really important when you're trying to braze something. I have magnets. I use them extensively during the build. And you can use magnets to kind of hold the pieces in place, which I'll probably still do just to make sure they don't fall out. Moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and cut some additional pieces to create that front bumper element that I told you guys about. So basically it'll be something more or less like this, which you can see in the little zoomed in camera here. And I'll have a couple pieces kind of holding it vertically. Just to kind of bring it all together. I know the one-to-one trophy trucks do it quite a bit, and even the scale guys are doing it, so it looks good. I like it, and maybe I'll throw in some off-road lights as well, so we'll see. Alright guys, so that is how I prep and cut, what's the title of this thing? Prep and, I don't know. That's how I prep these tubes and rods for building the cage originally and doing these updates. As always, if you guys have any questions, make sure you post in the comments below. I appreciate everybody's feedback. If there's anything that I missed or something you want me to cover in detail, please just let me know and I'd be happy to do it. Make sure you tune in for the next video. I'm going to be covering how I brazed the cage and how I brazed these pieces. We'll do a quick little example, sort of, you know, like we did with the notching fish mouth for today. And after that, we'll get into bead blasting and then final assembly. So I think that's it. That's probably enough for today. As always, take care and hope to see you in the next video.